Did your parents ever ask you to break the law? My parents forced me to steal from all my friends' homes and tried to convince me I was some kind of modern-day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Except by the poor, they just meant them. It started when I was 11, and this girl Harper from school invited me to her pool party. I'd never been to a house that nice, and when I got home, I was gushing about it to my parents, not knowing Dad was taking notes. The next day, Mom had me write down everything valuable I'd seen. She called it a memory game. 2 weeks later, she gave me a new backpack right before my new playlist with Harper and told me to take something from her house. Just bring home something small, she said. I refused. That night, they didn't feed me dinner. The next morning, no breakfast. By the third day, I was so hungry I stole Harper's mom's bracelet just to eat. Mom patted me on the head and called me a good girl, then reminded me to never tell Harper because she would hate me forever. I tried telling my teacher that my parents were making me do bad things, but when she called home, Mom cried about my compulsive lying problem, and the next week they transferred me to a new school. Try that again, and we'll move states, Dad warned. They enrolled me in rich kid activities: tennis, sailing, horseback riding. Each new friend was a target they'd researched. Each playdate was a mission, and when I refused, the punishments got worse and worse. When I wouldn't steal from one friend's house, they locked me out overnight in January. When I came back empty-handed from a sleepover, they took my blankets and made me sleep on the floor for a week. Food became currency because good theft meant meals, and resistance meant hunger. So I tried running away after they made me rob my math tutor's house. I made it 6 blocks before they found me. They'd sewn a tracker into my backpack lining. We can't go losing our best asset, can we? Mom said. Our little vigilante? Then she locked me in the basement for 2 days with no water. I started saving my money after that, planning to buy a bus ticket, but they searched my room weekly and found the money. They said that since I clearly couldn't be trusted, they'd have to bring in muscle. I didn't have to do any actual stealing, but what I did do was worse. Now I had to photograph financial documents, memorize alarm codes, and map house layouts for them to sell to professional thieves who robbed the houses. And they didn't just take an item or two. These professionals cleaned houses out completely. They took everything valuable while families slept. The guilt was eating me alive, but I had no idea how to get out at this point. I'd been an accessory for way too long to risk going to the police, not with the horror stories my parents had told me about what they'd do to me in juvenile detention. But then one night, one of the professional robberies went wrong. The Millers came home early from their anniversary dinner. Mr. Griffin heard noises upstairs and grabbed his weapon. Shots were fired in the dark. The thief took a bullet in the shoulder but fired back and escaped, and Mr. Griffin lost his life. The neighbors called 911, and by morning, the thief was arrested at the hospital where he'd sought treatment. Facing life in prison, the thief talked immediately, but it turned out my parents had already prepped him with a story for exactly the situation. He told police about the teenage girl who'd provided detailed house plans. He described me perfectly because my parents had shown him my photo. He knew which activities I did, which houses I visited, everything they told him about their daughter's little business. When the police came for me, my parents put on an Oscar-worthy performance. They showed the officers my room, where they'd already made sure all the evidence they'd forced me to collect was out in the open. Dad held Mom as she wailed about not knowing their daughter was running a criminal enterprise from her bedroom. I was arrested immediately. My parents visited once in juvenile detention, just to tell me their lawyer had advised them not to contact me again. They said they were cooperating fully with police, devastated to learn about my secret life. They'd even started a victims fund for families I'd hurt. The evidence was damning. My fingerprints in every robbed house. The thief's testimony that I was his teenage source. 47 counts of theft, conspiracy, and now accessory to attempted murder. And now a dead body. Every family in town knew I'd been in their homes, casing them. I sat in juvenile detention at 14, looking at decades in prison. My parents were free, playing grieving victims while planning their next mark. They'd raised me as their tool, then thrown me away when I became inconvenient. My public defender said to prepare for the worst, but it was hard to imagine hitting a rock bottom lower than this. But really, my nightmare was just getting started. The public defender's office smelled like old coffee and desperation. I sat across from my lawyer, watching her shuffle through papers with tired eyes. She looked younger than my parents, maybe early 30s, with dark circles that suggested she hadn't slept much lately. She set down the file and rubbed her temples. I could see my name printed on the folder tab, along with the case number that made my stomach turn. This was real. This was happening. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. She explained the charges, the evidence, the timeline. Her voice stayed professional, but I caught the way she kept glancing at the door, probably thinking about her next appointment. Another kid, another impossible case. Back in my cell, I stared at the concrete walls. The other girls in the unit kept their distance. Word traveled fast in juvie, and everyone knew about the rich kid who'd helped rob half the town. Some looked at me with disgust, others with something worse: respect. Meals came 3 times a day through a slot in the door. The food tasted like cardboard, but I ate every bite. After years of my parents using hunger as a weapon, I learned to never waste food. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here, locked up for crimes they'd forced me to commit, I ate more regularly than I had at home. During recreation hour, I kept to myself in the corner of the common room. The TV played some daytime talk show, but nobody really watched. Most girls clustered in groups, talking in low voices. I pretended to read a donated paperback with half its pages missing. A girl named Robin approached on my 3rd day. She was maybe 16, with braided hair and a scar across her eyebrow. She sat down next to me without asking. I tensed, waiting for threats or questions. Instead, she pulled out a deck of cards and started shuffling. We played in silence for 10 minutes before she spoke. She told me she'd been here 6 months. Her story came out in pieces over the next few days. Foster homes, running away, getting caught with stolen goods. But something in her voice when she talked about her last foster family reminded me of the way I felt about my parents. The guards did hourly checks, shining flashlights through the small window in each door. At night, I'd lie awake listening to crying from other cells, sometimes screaming. The staff would rush past, keys jingling, and then silence would fall again. My parents sent a letter after the first week. The guard handed it to me during mail call, watching my face. I recognized Mom's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, 3 pages of perfect parental anguish. They wrote about their shock, their heartbreak, their desperate wish to understand how their daughter had gone so wrong. They mentioned the victims fund again, how they were trying to make amends for my actions. The last paragraph talked about forgiveness and healing, but made it clear they couldn't visit anymore on their lawyer's advice. I tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the metal toilet. Robin found me in the rec room afterward. She took one look at my face and dealt the cards again. This time, she talked while we played. She told me about letters from her last foster parents, how they'd written similar things after she reported them, how they'd convinced everyone she was a troubled kid making up stories. The next morning brought another meeting with my public defender. She had new information. The prosecution wanted to try me as an adult for the conspiracy charges. If convicted, I'd face 25 to life. She explained the process, the hearings, the likelihood of success. Her words blurred together. 25 to life. I was 14. Back in the unit, I threw up in the communal bathroom. Another girl held my hair back without saying anything. Small kindnesses meant everything in here. Days blended together. Wake up, breakfast, school classes in a windowless room, lunch, group therapy, dinner, lights out, repeat. The teacher was an older woman who'd clearly seen too much. She assigned basic worksheets and didn't push when kids put their heads down. During group therapy, we sat in a circle while a counselor tried to get us to talk about our feelings. Most girls stayed silent or gave one-word answers. I learned quickly that honesty was dangerous. Anything you said could end up in a report in court used against you. 2 weeks in, a new girl arrived. She was younger than me, maybe 12, with hollow eyes. During her first night, her screaming woke the whole unit. The guards removed her in the morning. We never saw her again. Robin started teaching me things: how to read the guards' moods, which staff members actually cared, and which ones just counted days until retirement, how to look tough enough that others left you alone, but not so tough that staff saw you as a threat. She also taught me about the law library. 3 times a week we could request legal materials. Most girls never bothered, but Robin showed me how to fill out the forms. The books were outdated and half the pages were torn out, but it was something. Talk about parents of the year. Most kids get grounded for bad grades, but these 2 turned their daughter into a walking crime app with 5-star reviews from local thieves. I started reading about coercion, about duress defenses, about parental abuse. The legal language made my head spin, but I forced myself to understand. My public defender seemed surprised when I asked specific questions during our next meeting. She still looked tired, but something in her expression shifted. She pulled out a legal pad and actually took notes this time. When I mentioned the tracker in my backpack, she wrote faster. When I described the basement punishment, she asked for dates, duration, details. The meeting ran over. Her next appointment waited in the hall, but she waved them off. For the first time since my arrest, someone was actually listening. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the evidence my parents had manufactured, every theft they'd forced me to commit, documented, every house I'd been made to case, recorded. They'd been building this frame up for years, preparing for the day I might break free. But they'd made mistakes. They had to have. Nobody was perfect, not even my parents with all their planning. Robin noticed my mood the next day. During rec time, she sat beside me and shuffled her cards. cards. This time, instead of playing, she told me about a girl who'd been here last year. Parents had forced her to help with their substance business. Everyone thought she was guilty until her lawyer found text messages the parents had forgotten to delete. The girl was in a group home now. Not perfect, but free. Hope was dangerous in juvie. I'd already learned that. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. My parents might have planned for years, but they didn't plan for me to fight back. The next legal library session, I requested everything they had on parental coercion cases. The stack of books towered on the metal table. Most were useless, but buried in one was a case about a teenager forced to commit fraud by his parents. The defense had succeeded by showing a pattern of abuse and control. I started writing everything down. Every punishment, every threat, every time they'd locked me up or starved me. My hand cramped, but I kept writing. 3 years of abuse filled page after page. When I showed my public defender, she actually smiled. Not much, just a small upturn of her lips, but it transformed her tired face. She made copies of everything and promised to investigate. The other girls noticed the change in me. Some asked what I was doing with all those legal books. I kept my answers vague. Hope was dangerous, but false hope spreading through the unit would be worse. My parents sent another letter. This one came with newspaper clippings about their victims fund, photos of them at community meetings. They looked perfect in the pictures. Mom dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Dad's arm around her shoulders, the grieving parents betrayed by their criminal daughter. I saved these instead of destroying them. Evidence of their performance. Robin got transferred to a different unit after a fight in the cafeteria. I wasn't involved, but losing the only person I'd connected with hit hard. She managed to pass me a note before leaving. Just 4 words. Keep fighting. Get free. The empty seat beside me during rec time felt enormous. Other girls tried to fill it, but I wasn't ready. Trust was too expensive in here. My public defender visited again, this time with a thick folder. She'd found things. Small things, but things that didn't add up in my parents' story. Receipts showing they'd bought the robbery tools found in my room. Bank records showing deposits after each theft. Always just under the reporting limit. She still warned me not to get my hopes up. The evidence against me was overwhelming, but she used the word defense now instead of plea deal. I went back to the law library, back to writing, back to remembering every detail of every forced theft. The pages piled up. My story finally being told, even if only to legal pads and an overworked lawyer. 3 weeks into my time, something shifted in the unit. Word had gotten out about what I was doing. Not the details, but enough. Other girls started approaching me quietly, asking about the law library, about their own cases, about lawyers who wouldn't listen. I helped where I could, showed them how to request books, how to write things down, how to ask better questions. It wasn't much, but it was something. We were all trapped here, but maybe we didn't have to be trapped forever. The days still blended together, but now they had purpose. Every page I wrote, every legal concept I understood, every small piece of evidence my lawyer found, they all led somewhere. Where exactly, I didn't know yet. But for the first time since the police had put me in handcuffs, I believed I might find out. My public defender called an emergency meeting the following morning. She arrived with 2 thick binders and a laptop. Her usual exhaustion replaced by something sharper. She spread papers across the metal table between us, pointing to highlighted sections. The prosecution had accelerated their timeline. My transfer hearing was scheduled for next week. If they succeeded in trying me as an adult, I'd be moved to county jail to await trial. The thought of leaving juvenile detention for adult lockup made my hands shake as I signed the paperwork she pushed toward me. She explained that my parents had been busy. They'd given 3 interviews to local papers, each one painting them as devastated victims who'd missed all the warning signs. Mom had apparently broken down during a town hall meeting, sobbing about how she'd failed as a mother. Dad had started a support group for parents of troubled teens. The binders contained transcripts of their interviews. I read through them, my stomach churning at their manufactured grief. They crafted a narrative where I'd been secretive and manipulative since childhood, hiding my criminal activities behind a facade of normalcy. They even claimed I'd threatened them when they tried to intervene. My lawyer had also obtained my school records. Page after page showed the pattern. Excellent grades at one school, then sudden transfer. New school, new friends, another transfer. 7 schools in 3 years. Each move coincided with dates I documented in my abuse timeline. She'd interviewed my former teachers. Most barely remembered me, but 2 stood out. Ms. Chen from 5th grade recalled my hunger complaints and how I'd hoarded snacks. Mr. Rodriguez from 7th grade remembered finding me sleeping in the library multiple mornings, claiming I got into school early to study. Armed with this information, my lawyer filed motions requesting my parents' financial records and phone data. The judge would rule on them tomorrow. She warned me that my parents' attorney would fight hard against any disclosure. That afternoon brought an unexpected development. During lunch, a guard summoned me to the administrative office. A woman in her 40s sat waiting, introducing herself as Victoria Winsman, a social worker from Child Protective Services. My lawyer had contacted them about my case. Victoria asked detailed questions about my home life before arrest. I described the punishments, the forced thefts, the tracker in my backpack. She took notes without expression, occasionally asking for clarification. When I mentioned the basement lockdowns, she asked about duration, frequency, access to facilities. The interview lasted 2 hours. Victoria photographed old scars on my arms from the January lockout when I tried climbing back through a window. She documented everything meticulously. Her manner professional, but not unkind. Before leaving, she mentioned she'd be investigating further. Back in my unit, I found chaos. 2 girls had gotten into a fight during afternoon rec time. Blood spattered the common room floor. The entire unit was on lockdown, confined to cells until further notice. Through my door's window, I watched staff members in protective gear cleaning up. Lockdown meant no law library, no rec time, no group sessions, just 4 walls and my own thoughts. I spent hours writing, filling notebook after notebook with memories. The time Mom had made me memorize the layout of my piano teacher's house. The way Dad had practiced concerned parent expressions in the mirror before parent-teacher conferences. On the 2nd day of lockdown, mail arrived. Another letter from my parents, this time through their lawyer. They were concerned about my mental health, worried I was having delusions about abuse. They consulted with a psychiatrist who never met me, but was willing to testify about false memory syndrome. The letter included a proposal. If I admitted full responsibility and agreed not to implicate them, they'd pay for a private attorney and push for juvenile rehabilitation instead of adult prison. All I had to do was maintain their version of events, that I'd acted alone, driven by greed and rebellion. I stared at the offer. A private attorney could mean the difference between 5 years and 25, but accepting would mean letting them win, letting them continue their crimes with some other vulnerable kid. Lockdown lifted after 3 days. The first person I saw in the common room was a new arrival, a girl named Jamie who'd been placed in Robin's old cell. She was 15, arrested for identity theft. Within an hour, she detached herself to me, asking about the law library, about my case, about everything. Something felt wrong about her immediate interest. I kept my distance, giving vague answers, but Jamie persisted, showing up wherever I went, always asking questions about my parents, my lawyer, my defense strategy. My suspicions proved justified when another girl, Jack Edge, pulled me aside in the bathroom. She'd overheard Jamie on the phone during her intake, telling someone she'd make contact and report back. Jack Edge had been around long enough to recognize a plant when she saw one. I thanked Jake Edge and adjusted my behavior accordingly. How did Victoria know exactly which questions to ask about the basement lockdowns? She asked about facilities access like she'd seen this exact pattern before. That's such specific knowledge for a social worker to have ready. Around Jamie, I talked about accepting responsibility, about how my parents were victims too. I let her see me throwing away my legal notes, pretending to give up. Meanwhile, I continued writing in a different notebook, hidden inside my pillowcase. Victoria returned for a follow-up interview. This time she brought photographs, pictures of our old houses, documentation of the frequent moves. She tracked down former neighbors who remembered strange things. The Johnsons recalled how I'd never had friends over. Mrs. Park mentioned seeing me sitting on the porch in winter, locked out. She'd also discovered something interesting in school enrollment records. Each time we'd moved, my parents had listed different emergency contacts, previous addresses, even slightly altered birth dates. It looked like they'd been trying to make me harder to track, creating a confusing paper trail. The transfer hearing arrived faster than expected. I sat in the courtroom in shackles, watching my parents in the gallery. Mom wore a conservative dress, tissues clutched in her hand. Dad had his arm around her, the picture of supportive husband. They didn't look at me once. The prosecutor painted me as a calculating criminal criminal who'd orchestrated dozens of burglaries. He emphasized Mr. Griffin's death, the families who'd lost everything, the betrayal of trust. He argued that my age was irrelevant given the sophisticated nature of my crimes. My public defender fought back with everything she had. She presented the school records, the CPS report, the evidence of abuse. She argued that I'd been coerced, controlled, and ultimately framed by the real criminals, my parents. The judge listened without expression. After both sides finished, he announced he'd rule within 48 hours. Back in my cell, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything but those shackles getting tighter if I was sent to adult facility. Jamie ramped up her efforts to get close to me. She started crying about her own case, trying to bond over shared experiences. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, talking about how the system was rigged, how we needed to stick together. I played along just enough to keep her interested, but revealed nothing real. My lawyer visited with mixed news. The judge had granted partial access to my parents' financial records, but only for the past year. Phone records were denied. She'd have to make do with what she had. She also warned me that my parents' attorney had filed a motion to prevent me from testifying, claiming I was mentally unstable. I gave her the notebook I'd been hiding, filled with more detailed memories. She read through it quickly, her eyes widening at certain passages. The incident where Dad had made me practice crying on command. The time Mom had locked me in a closet for 8 hours after I'd refused to steal from my best friend. Victoria made a third visit, this time accompanied by a detective from the financial crimes unit. They'd been investigating the robbery patterns and found inconsistencies. The thieves had known things I couldn't have known. Security codes that had been changed after my visits, valuables that had been moved, schedules that had shifted. The detective asked about my parents' friends, their routines, their technology use. I told him about Dad's encrypted laptop, Mom's multiple phones, the locked room in our house I'd never been allowed to enter. He took notes, exchanging glances with Victoria. That night, Jamie made her biggest push yet. She cornered me in the laundry room, claiming she'd overheard guards saying I was definitely getting transferred to adult facility. She said she knew people who could help, people who could get messages to the outside, maybe even arrange something with my parents. I pretended to consider it, then told her I needed time to think. She pressed harder, saying time was running out. When I stayed firm, her mask slipped for just a second, frustration flashing across her face before the concerned act resumed. The judge's ruling came down the next morning. Split decision. I'd be tried as a juvenile for the theft charges, but as an adult for the conspiracy and accessory charges. It was better than full adult prosecution, but still meant potential decades in prison. My parents were in the courtroom for the announcement. This time, Mom made eye contact, just for a moment. The look she gave me was pure ice. No trace of the grieving mother she played for everyone else. Dad whispered something to their attorney, who nodded and made notes. Back in detention, I found my cell had been searched. Nothing was missing, but everything was slightly displaced. My hidden notebook was still there, but pages had been photographed. I could tell by the tiny creases. Jamie must have reported my continued writing. My lawyer called an emergency meeting. My parents had filed a new motion claiming I was coaching other detained girls to lie about their own parents, creating false abuse allegations. They'd submitted statements from unnamed sources within the facility. We both knew it was Jamie, but couldn't prove it. She showed me something else. Bank records she'd managed to analyze. Patterns of deposits that matched robbery dates, always structured to avoid reporting requirements. Wire transfers to accounts in other states. My parents had been careful, but not careful enough. The financial crimes detective returned with more questions. They'd executed a search warrant on my parents' house, focusing on the locked room. Inside, they'd found multiple computers, boxes of documents, and something interesting. Detailed files on dozens of families, including ones I'd never visited. He showed me photographs of the evidence, maps with houses marked, financial documents, family schedules, security system manuals, far more than I could have gathered from playdates and sleepovers. My parents had been running their operation long before they'd involved me. This changed everything. My lawyer immediately filed amended motions, arguing that I'd been a tool in a larger criminal enterprise. She pushed for charges against my parents, presenting the new evidence to the prosecutor. For the first time, cracks appeared in their victim facade. Jamie disappeared from the unit 2 days later. Official story was a transfer, but Jake had heard guards saying she'd been caught with contraband and moved to isolation. Without their inside source, my parents had to adjust their strategy. They responded by escalating. Their attorney held a press conference, announcing they were establishing a foundation for victims of juvenile crime. They pledged to donate their house proceeds to families affected by the robberies. The community rallied around them, unaware the house was purchased with stolen money. My lawyer warned me things would get harder before they got better. The prosecutor was under pressure to convict someone for Mr. Griffin's death. My parents had given him a convenient target, their own daughter, gift wrapped with evidence they'd spent years manufacturing. But we had momentum now. Victoria's investigation had expanded. She'd found former neighbors willing to testify about suspicious behavior. The financial crimes unit was building a case. My detailed notes were corroborating evidence they discovered independently. I spent every free moment in the law library, researching cases similar to mine. Most ended badly for the child forced into crime, but a few offered hope. Instances where patient investigation revealed the truth behind parental manipulation. The unit dynamics shifted after Jamie left. Girls who'd been suspicious of me started opening up. They'd seen through Jamie too, recognized her as a threat. Some shared their own stories of adult manipulation, of being used and discarded. My 18th birthday was approaching in 3 months. If convicted as an adult, I'd be transferred to state prison immediately. The thought terrified me, but I pushed forward. Every document I could remember, every incident I could recall went into my notebooks. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. One of the professional thieves had been arrested in another state. Facing his third strike, he was willing to talk. He contacted my lawyer, offering information about my parents' operation in exchange for consideration. His statement was damning. He described meetings with my parents where they'd provided detailed intelligence, far beyond what a child could gather. He had recordings of phone calls where they discussed using me as cover. Most importantly, he revealed there were others, kids they'd used before me. My lawyer worked frantically to track down these other victims. 2 had aged out of the system and disappeared, but one, a young man named Jake, was found working at a restaurant 3 states away. His story mirrored mine. Forced theft, manufactured evidence, abandonment when things went wrong. Jake agreed to testify. He'd spent 2 years in juvenile detention before the real perpetrators were caught. By then, his parents had vanished with the proceeds. He'd been released but never recovered, bouncing between jobs, unable to trust anyone. The prosecutor finally began to see the pattern. Reluctantly, he agreed to investigate my parents, but he warned it would take time. They'd covered their tracks well. Meanwhile, my charges remained. My trial date approaching. My parents made one last play. They offered a deal through their attorney. They'd admit to negligent supervision if I pled guilty to reduced charges, 5 years instead of 25. Their reputation would take a hit, but they'd avoid criminal prosecution. I refused. My lawyer supported the decision, but reminded me of the risks. If the investigation into my parents stalled, if the jury believed their performance over my truth, I'd spend my adult life in prison. But something had shifted in me during those months in detention. The girl who'd stolen to avoid starvation had found her voice, playing chess while everyone else thinks it's checkers. Our narrator's hiding notebooks like a spy while pretending to give up, and Jamie's trying so hard to be sneaky she might as well wear a sign saying, "Definitely not working." I wouldn't let them win, wouldn't let them move on to another victim. The investigation intensified. Financial forensics revealed the scope of their operation. 17 robberies over 6 years, total proceeds exceeding $2 million. They'd been smart, investing in legitimate businesses, paying taxes on laundered money, but they made one crucial error. The locked room contained a journal where Dad had documented everything, thinking it was protected by attorney-client privilege from a lawyer friend. But privilege didn't apply to ongoing criminal enterprises. The journal detailed how they'd selected targets, groomed me for the role, created evidence trails. It even contained contingency plans for if I was caught, including the false testimony they'd prepared for the thieves. When police arrested my parents, I watched from the detention center's TV room. Mom's perfect composure finally cracked as officers led her away in handcuffs. Dad tried to maintain his victim act, shouting about being persecuted for their troubled daughter's crimes, but the evidence was overwhelming now. Other parents came forward, realizing their robberies had followed my visits. The pattern was clear. I'd been the unwitting scout, but my parents were the masterminds. My trial trial was postponed pending the new developments. The prosecutor, faced with evidence of my coercion, began discussing alternative resolutions, but nothing was certain. The legal system moved slowly, and I remained locked up, waiting. Support came from unexpected places. Some of the robbed families, learning the truth, wrote letters advocating for my release. They'd lost possessions, but recognized I'd lost my childhood. Not all forgave, but enough understood. My lawyer built our defense methodically. The abuse documentation, the coercion evidence, the pattern of exploitation. She brought in experts on child manipulation, on Stockholm syndrome, on the psychology of parental abuse. The other girls in detention rallied around me. They'd seen Jamie's games, watched my parents' performances on TV. They understood betrayal by adults who were supposed to protect you. In that understanding, I found a strange kind of family. As my parents' trial date approached, their strategy became clear. They'd claim I'd manipulated them, that the journal was fiction, that they'd been trying to control a disturbed child. They had experts too, ready to testify about teenage psychopathy. But Jake's testimony would be crucial. He could establish the pattern, show this wasn't about one troubled kid, but a system of exploitation. Other witnesses emerged, former neighbors who'd seen too much, business associates who'd suspected the truth. I prepared for my own testimony, practicing with my lawyer until I could recite events without breaking down. The truth was my only weapon against their lies. I had to make the jury see past the performance to the calculating criminals, Jakey. The financial investigation revealed more victims, more robberies, more lies. My parents had built their comfortable life on others' losses, using their own children as tools. The prosecutor finally understood he'd been targeting the wrong person. But understanding and action were different things. The legal system protected parents, assumed their good intentions. Proving systematic abuse and exploitation required clearing a high bar. My freedom hung in the balance. As autumn approached, I'd been in detention for 6 months. I'd learned to navigate the system, found purpose in helping other girls understand their rights. But I was tired, worn down by the constant fight for truth. My lawyer remained optimistic. The evidence was strong, the pattern clear, but she warned me that justice wasn't guaranteed. My parents had resources, connections, and the ability to perform innocence convincingly. The next phase would be crucial. Their trial would begin soon, and with it, the final battle for my freedom. Everything I'd documented, every truth I'd preserved would be tested. The outcome would determine whether I'd spend decades in prison for crimes they'd forced me to commit. I sat in my cell that night, surrounded by legal books and notebooks full of memories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts to twist the truth, but I was ready. They'd raised me to be their tool, but I'd become their downfall instead. The girl who'd once stolen to eat had found her strength. Whatever came next, I wouldn't stop fighting. My parents had taught me well, just not the lessons they'd intended. The morning of my parents' trial, I woke to find a new girl in Jamie's old spot. Unlike Jamie's calculated approach, this one kept to herself, barely acknowledging anyone. I focused on my morning routine, preparing for what would be the most important day of my life. My lawyer arrived early, carrying boxes of evidence. She'd arranged for me to testify via video link from a secure room in the detention center. The judge had approved it after reviewing the security concerns. My parents still had connections, and appearing in person posed risks. In the preparation room, Victoria sat beside me, offering quiet support. She'd become a constant presence, documenting everything, building the case that should have been built years ago. Her investigation had uncovered 17 other families my parents had targeted before involving me. The video link activated, showing the courtroom. My parents sat at the defense table, dressed impeccably. Mom wore pearls and a modest dress. Dad had trimmed his hair and wore the same concerned expression he'd perfected over years. Their lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman with cold eyes, shuffled through papers. The prosecutor opened with the evidence from the locked room. Page by page, he presented Dad's journal entries. Each one detailed their schemes, their selection process, their grooming techniques. The jury listened intently as he read passages about training the asset and maintaining control through strategic deprivation. My parents' lawyer tried to discredit the journal, claiming it was fiction written for a crime novel Dad had been planning, but the dates matched perfectly with the robberies. The victims' names were real, and the financial records supported every entry. Jake testified next, his voice steady despite visible trembling. He described his experience from 5 years ago, the same pattern of forced theft, manufactured evidence, and abandonment. His parents had vanished when authorities got close, leaving him to face charges alone. The jury leaned forward as he detailed the hunger punishments, the isolation tactics, the calculated destruction of his support systems. The financial forensics expert took hours explaining the money trail. Charts showed how my parents had structured deposits to avoid detection, moved funds through multiple accounts, and invested in legitimate businesses to launder proceeds. The complexity revealed planning that spanned years before my birth. During lunch break, I sat with Victoria and my lawyer, unable to eat. They reviewed my testimony one more time, reminding me to focus on facts, not emotions. The afternoon would bring my parents' defense, and we all knew they'd prepared extensively. Mom took the stand first. She cried delicately, dabbing her eyes with tissues. She painted herself as a mother who'd tried everything to help her troubled daughter. She claimed the journal was Dad's attempt to understand my criminal behavior by imagining himself in my position. She insisted the money came from legitimate investments and family inheritance. The prosecutor's cross-examination revealed cracks. He asked about specific dates when I'd been locked in the basement. Mom claimed those were timeouts for bad behavior, but couldn't explain why the punishment lasted days, or why I'd been denied water. He presented photos of the locks on the basement door, industrial grade, installed from the outside. Dad followed, playing the bewildered father. He admitted to being strict, but claimed it was tough love for a child showing criminal tendencies. He couldn't explain why they moved so frequently, or why school records showed excellent grades until each sudden transfer. When asked about the tracker in my backpack, he said it was for my safety, but couldn't justify why it was sewn into the lining. Their lawyer called character witnesses, neighbors who described my parents as pillars of the community. But under cross-examination, these witnesses admitted they'd never been inside our house, never seen our family dynamics up close. Their testimony amounted to surface impressions of a carefully maintained facade. The second day brought more evidence. Police had found storage units rented under fake names, filled with stolen goods from robberies spanning a decade. Security footage showed my parents accessing these units, contradicting their claims of ignorance. Phone records revealed burner phones, encrypted communications, contacts with known fences. My testimony came on day 3. Speaking through the video link, I detailed every punishment, every forced theft, every threat. I showed the scars from the January lockout, described the hunger that drove me to steal, explained how they'd isolated me from anyone who might help. My voice stayed steady even as Mom's mask slipped, her expression hardening when she thought the camera wasn't on her. The prosecutor introduced my notebooks, hundreds of pages documenting abuse. My parents' lawyer tried to dismiss them as recent fabrications, but the paper analysis showed varying ages, some entries years old. The detective testified about finding matching details in the evidence seized from our house. Other victims testified throughout the week. The Millers' surviving family members described their devastation. Harper's mother identified her bracelet among the recovered items. Family after family recounted violations of their homes, their trust, their sense of security. The way Dad wrote down every single detail in that journal is mind-blowing. Did he really think being friends with a lawyer would protect those notes? Each testimony connected to entries in Dad's journal, to deposits in their accounts. My parents' defense crumbled day by day. Their expert witness on false memory syndrome admitted under cross-examination that he'd never actually examined me. Their financial advisor revealed suspicious activity he'd reported years ago, only to be told it was inheritance from relatives who didn't exist. The smoking GN came from an unexpected source. One of the professional thieves, seeking a deal, provided recordings of planning sessions with my parents. Their voices were clear, discussing which child, me or previous victims, would provide access to which homes. They laughed about my fear of the basement, calling it an effective motivator. Closing arguments took a full day. The prosecutor methodically laid out the evidence, financial records, journal entries, witness testimony, physical evidence. He showed how my parents had operated a criminal enterprise for over a decade, using their own children as tools, discarding them when they became liabilities. My parents' lawyer made one last attempt, arguing that even if they'd made mistakes, they were still parents trying to control a difficult child. She claimed the evidence was circumstantial, the journal creative writing, the recordings doctored, but her arguments felt hollow against the mountain of proof. The jury deliberated isolated for 2 days. I spent them in my cell, unable to focus on anything. Other girls brought me food I couldn't eat, sat with me in silence. Even the guards seemed gentler, understanding the weight of waiting. When the verdict came, I watched on the video link. The jury foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands, guilty on all counts: racketeering, child abuse, conspiracy, theft, money laundering. My parents sat frozen as count after count was read. Mom's perfect composure finally shattered completely. Dad's shoulders slumped, the facade falling away. The judge ordered them held without bail pending sentencing. As officers led them away, Mom turned toward the camera, toward me. Her expression held no remorse, only rage at being caught. Dad didn't look back at all. My lawyer immediately filed for dismissal of my charges. The prosecutor, faced with overwhelming evidence of coercion, agreed. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following week, but the outcome seemed certain now. The real criminals had been exposed. Back in my unit, the other girls celebrated quietly. They understood what this meant, not just for me, but for any kid trapped by adults who should protect them. Victoria promised to expedite placement planning, to find somewhere safe for me to start over. The dismissal hearing was anticlimactic. The prosecutor formally dropped all charges, acknowledging I'd been a victim, not a perpetrator. The judge ordered my immediate release and expungement of my record. After 6 months in detention for crimes I'd been forced to commit, I was finally free. But freedom felt strange after months of concrete walls. Victoria drove me to a transitional housing facility, a small apartment complex for youth aging out of various systems. My unit had a bedroom, bathroom, tiny kitchen, basic but mine. No locks on the outside, no one controlling my food, no punishment for existing. The first night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. I checked the door repeatedly, confirming I could leave whenever I wanted. The refrigerator held food I could eat without permission. Simple freedoms felt surreal after years of control. My parents' sentencing came 3 weeks later. 25 years for Mom, 30 for Dad due to the journal evidence. Restitution to all victims, though most of the money had been spent or hidden. They'd appeal, their lawyer promised, but the evidence was insurmountable. Some victims forgave me immediately, understanding I'd been a tool. Others needed time. Harper's family sent a letter, not absolving, but acknowledging the truth. They hoped I could build a better life now. It was more than I dared hope for. Jake reached out through Victoria, offering to connect me with resources he found helpful. Other survivors of parental exploitation formed a small network, sharing strategies for healing, for building trust, for creating lives beyond what was done to us. I enrolled in online school to catch up on education disrupted by constant moves and eventual arrest. The work felt manageable compared to memorizing house layouts and security codes. Teachers commented on my dedication, not knowing how precious education felt when it wasn't contingent on criminal activity. Victoria helped me apply for victim compensation funds, enough to cover basic expenses while I rebuilt. I found part-time work at a local library, shelving books and helping patrons. The routine felt safe. Predictable tasks, clear expectations, no hidden agendas. Months passed in small victories. Opening a bank account in my own name, getting a driver's license, shopping for groceries without fear. Each normal activity carried weight after years of abnormal existence. Recovery wasn't linear. Nightmares persisted. Trust came slowly. Some days felt impossible. The other girls from detention stayed in touch when they could. We understood each other in ways others couldn't. Some succeeded, finding stability and purpose. Others struggled, cycling back through the system. We celebrated victories and mourned setbacks together. A year after my release, I testified at a legislative hearing about coerced youth crime. Not for fame or attention, but because other kids remained trapped. My voice shook as I described the hunger, the isolation, the careful grooming. Lawmakers listened, promising to consider stronger protections for minors forced into crime. I started community college, studying social work. The irony wasn't lost on me, pursuing a career helping kids like I'd been. Professors encouraged my perspective, saying lived experience brought invaluable insight. Classmates knew nothing of my past unless I chose to share. Dating felt impossible at first. How do you explain years of forced crime, months in detention, parents serving decades in prison? But slowly, carefully, I learned to trust individual people, to share my story in pieces, to accept that some would understand and others wouldn't. My parents tried contacting me through their lawyers, seeking reconciliation or at least communication. I declined every request. They'd had 14 years to choose differently. Their letters went unread, their calls unanswered. Some bridges deserved to stay burned. 3 years after my arrest, I stood in a cap and gown, receiving my associate degree. Victoria sat in the audience, beaming like a parent I'd never had. Jake sent congratulations from across the country where he'd built his own life. The girl who'd once stolen to eat now had a future she'd chosen herself. I moved to a different state for university, somewhere my story wasn't known, not hiding, just choosing when and how to share my history. The nightmares faded to occasional bad dreams. The hypervigilance softened to reasonable caution. The guilt transformed into determination to help others escape similar traps. My parents' appeals failed. They'd served their full sentences, emerging elderly, if at all. Sometimes I wondered if they felt remorse or just regret at getting caught, but mostly I didn't think about them. They'd stolen enough years, they wouldn't get more. At 21, I spoke at a conference for juvenile justice reform. My voice steady now. I described the systematic abuse disguised as parenting, the criminal enterprise built on children's suffering. Audience members cried, but I didn't. Those tears had been spent long ago. Life wasn't perfect. Trust remained difficult. Relationships required constant work. Some days the past felt impossibly heavy, but each morning brought choice: to eat when hungry, leave when ready, exist without fear. Freedom I'd never take for granted. The girl forced to steal had become a woman who chose to heal, to help, to hope. My parents had raised me as their tool, but I forged myself into something else entirely: a survivor, an advocate, a person who understood that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to become what tried to break you. Thanks for letting me toss out my random little brain sparks. Always fun sharing this stuff with you. Stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.